A small alien civilization lived far away on the edge of the galaxy. For many years they had lived peacefully, building their homes, raising their children, and trying to make a safe future. They were not a strong people. Their ships were simple, their weapons outdated, and their defenses almost nothing compared to the larger empires that roamed the stars. Still, they hoped that because they did not cause trouble, no one would notice them. But the galaxy is not a safe place, and peace does not always last. One day, a powerful and hostile enemy discovered their world. This enemy was larger, cruel, and hungry for control. They did not see the small civilization as people worth respecting. Instead, they saw them as weak prey, easy to conquer and use for their own gain. The aliens tried to resist at first, but their small fleets were quickly destroyed. Their cities were burned, their people were taken, and every day their hope grew smaller. They realized that they could not survive alone. If they did nothing, their world would fall completely into the hands of the invaders. In desperation, they turned to the stars. They built a beacon, a signal that could travel across the galaxy faster than light. The message was simple: please help us. We are dying, save us. It was a cry of fear, a last hope that somewhere someone might hear and show mercy. When the signal was released, no one among them truly believed it would matter. They thought maybe the message would fade into the void, lost in the endless space where stars burned and died without anyone noticing. If it was heard, perhaps it would be by another weak people who could not help them. Or worse, perhaps another cruel empire would hear and come to finish what the invaders had started. But they had no choice. Sending the message was better than waiting to be destroyed. What they did not know was that far across the stars, the signal reached Earth. Humanity was different from most other civilizations. Born on a harsh world full of danger, humans had survived and grown stronger through endless struggle. They were known by others as Deathworlders, beings who came from a planet where even nature itself fought to kill them. They had learned to adapt, to resist, and to fight harder than almost any other species. Where others saw fear, humans saw challenge. Where others gave up, humans found a way to keep going. This reputation had spread quietly in parts of the galaxy, though many still did not fully understand what it meant. When humanity intercepted the alien signal, leaders, scientists, and generals studied it carefully. It was a true call for help, not a trick. The message carried the voice of people who were terrified, begging anyone to save them. To many humans, it struck a deep chord. Humanity remembered its own history, wars, invasions, and times when survival seemed impossible. They knew what it was like to be desperate, to need help, and to have no one listening. That memory awakened something powerful in them. Yet there was also another side to humanity. They were not saviors who arrived gently. They had learned that mercy, if it came, was always tied to strength. They did not come quietly or with half measures. When humans answered, they answered completely. The decision to respond to the alien SOS set into motion a chain of events that no other species in the galaxy had prepared for. Humanity began to prepare their armadas, their fleets of warships built to survive the harshest battles. The small alien civilization could not have imagined what they had done. To them, it was a simple, desperate act, a final cry before silence. But in truth, they had awakened giants. Across the stars, in stations and shipyards, human war machines came alive. Entire battle groups were called to readiness. Strategists studied the threat, planned movements, and prepared to strike with overwhelming force. The galaxy itself shifted the moment the humans heard that cry. Some species who later learned of it whispered with relief. Perhaps these humans could be protectors, saviors who defended the weak. But others trembled, because they knew what human fury could bring. Wherever humans went, war often followed, and war never left things the same. For the desperate aliens, the beacon was a last chance at survival. For humanity, it was a call that touched something deep, something they could not ignore. And for the galaxy, it was the spark that would ignite stories and fears for generations. The moment the signal reached Earth, the universe itself began to change, even if no one yet understood how much. When the signal from the alien world was fully studied and confirmed, there was no longer any doubt it was a true cry for help. The message had not come from a rival empire or a trickster civilization, but from a small and desperate people on the verge of being wiped out. On Earth, the discovery caused immediate movement at the highest levels of power. The great halls of government filled with leaders, scientists, admirals, and strategists. The Interstellar Command, which directed Earth's fleets across the stars, called emergency sessions that lasted day and night. Everyone understood what this message meant. It was not simply about one planet under attack. It was about a choice that would define humanity's role in the galaxy. Inside these meetings, voices clashed. Some leaders argued that the message should be ignored. Humanity had its own challenges, its own enemies, and its own fragile peace to protect. Why should they risk lives and resources for strangers they had never met? Others warned that stepping into another species' war would drag Earth into conflicts it did not start. History, they said, was full of stories where human intervention only made the flames of war burn brighter. If they marched into this battle, there would be no easy way back, but there were stronger voices that rose above the doubts. These voices reminded the Council of Humanity's duty. Humans were not blind wanderers in the galaxy. They were a people shaped by survival. They knew the pain of being powerless and the cost of being ignored. If a weaker species had cried out to them, could humanity truly look away? To do nothing would mean allowing the helpless to be slaughtered while they stood idle. The thought weighed heavily on the hearts of many leaders. The debate grew fierce. Reports were shown, charts displayed, risks calculated. Generals spoke of logistics and weapon readiness. Economists spoke of the strain a war would put on resources. Diplomats warned of how other empires would see this move. Every possible outcome was discussed in detail. And yet, even after all the warnings and doubts, one truth could not be denied. Humanity had heard the cry, and once humans heard, they rarely turned away. At last, the decision was made. Earth would respond, not with a token effort, not with a handful of ships to show sympathy, but with full force. Humanity's way had never been to step lightly. If they were to act, they would act with certainty, and they would act together. The announcement spread across the command networks like fire. The mobilization order was official. Admirals relayed commands to shipyards and fleets. Pilots were recalled from leave. Engineers worked around the clock to ready the great war machines. Across Earth's colonies, from Mars to distant outposts, the call went out. Prepare for deployment. The scale of the preparation was immense. Massive carriers, each the size of a small city, were awakened from their docks. Dreadnoughts, bristling with weapons powerful enough to shatter moons, powered up their cores. Frigates, cruisers, and supply ships formed into units, practicing maneuvers and aligning their codes. Factories produced ammunition and armor at full speed. Civilian industries were redirected to support the war effort. In every sector of human space, there was a sense of urgency, a feeling that something enormous was about to happen. Ordinary people, too, felt the change. Families watched loved ones leave for service, unsure if they would ever return. Workers labored longer shifts, knowing that every hour could mean the difference for those who had cried for help. News channels buzzed with the debate. Was humanity doing the right thing, or were they walking into a storm that would reshape everything? Yet even with fear in the air, there was pride too. Humanity was answering a call no one else had dared to answer. Behind all the activity, a shadow of history hung over the decision. This was not the first time humans had stepped into conflicts far from home. And in nearly every case, their arrival had changed the balance completely. When humans fought, battles escalated, empires trembled, and entire regions of space were transformed. Their reputation was not of quiet mediators, but of fierce warriors who brought overwhelming force. Everyone knew this. Every leader in the council had thought of it. And yet the order had still been given. Why? Because to do nothing would betray what humanity had become. They were not just survivors anymore. They were a civilization with fleets that could cross the stars, with power that could protect or destroy. To hear a desperate cry and remain silent would be a denial of their own identity. Humanity was harsh, yes, but they were not heartless. Their compassion was tied to their fury, and both would be unleashed together. As the fleets gathered, the galaxy held its breath. Observers in other civilizations watched carefully. Some whispered warnings. Wherever the Deathworlders go, destruction follows. Others hoped in secret that if they themselves were ever in danger, humans might come for them too. But for the small alien civilization who had sent the signal, they had no idea yet of what was coming. They only knew that someone had heard them. On Earth, the final preparations neared completion. Commanders reviewed strategies again and again, leaving nothing to chance. Scouts mapped the route toward the alien world, calculating every risk. Soldiers sharpened their resolve, ready to fight not for conquest but for strangers who had reached out in fear. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. When the order was finally sealed, a silence settled across the council chamber. Every leader present understood the weight of what they had done. They had chosen not just to save a small people, but to remind the galaxy of what it meant when humanity acted. Soon the Armada would rise, and the consequences, whether good or terrible, would follow. The chain of events had begun, and it could no longer be stopped. The moment the order for mobilization was given, the machinery of humanity moved with frightening speed. Across the planets and colonies under Earth's command, lights came on in shipyards that stretched like cities in orbit. Giant construction bays where ships the size of mountains floated half-finished suddenly burst into life. Welding torches glowed, engineers rushed, and machines roared as unfinished hulls were completed at record pace. Where other civilizations might take months or years to gather forces, humanity managed it in weeks, sometimes even days. It was as if the entire species had been waiting for this call, waiting for a reason to prove what they could do when united under a single cause. Carriers, massive ships so large that they could carry entire fleets of fighters, were pulled from their docks. Their hangars filled with squadrons of sleek, deadly craft, each one armed with weapons sharp enough to pierce the shields of enemy warships. Dreadnoughts followed, their dark hulls glowing with power as reactors woke up deep inside them. Each dreadnought was a fortress in space, bristling with cannons capable of shattering continents. Around them, cruisers and frigates assembled in tight formations, their engines burning bright as they prepared to escort the giants of war. Supply vessels and hospital ships were also made ready, because humans understood that war was not only about fighting, it was about surviving long after the fight was over. The efficiency of the process shocked even their allies. Every station, every defense network, every industrial center had a role to play, and all of them performed with precision. Orders traveled across light years almost instantly, and within days a force unlike anything seen in centuries stood ready to move. There was no hesitation, no delay, no half measures. Humanity was not sending a token fleet to show sympathy. They were not planning to negotiate or test the waters. Their strategy was clear: crush the enemy completely, leave no doubt, and make it impossible for anyone else to threaten the weak again, at least for a time. For the alien civilization that had sent the SOS, the sight of this armada was beyond comprehension. At first they had imagined perhaps a few ships might come to help them, maybe a small patrol group that would fight alongside their scattered defenders. They had pictured aid that was cautious, limited, and fragile. Instead, what they saw made their blood run cold and their hearts soar at the same time. Thousands upon thousands of human ships formed into vast wings, their formations sharp and disciplined. Entire fleets gathered until they filled the stars like swarms of steel. To the desperate aliens, it was like watching the night sky itself awaken and turn into an army. The philosophy behind this was pure human nature. When humans chose to act, they believed in overwhelming force. They did not like leaving battles half-finished. They did not believe in slow and cautious aid that might only delay defeat. If they fought, it was to end the threat completely. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon was part of that purpose. The galaxy had a word for this way of thinking: total war. But to humans, it was simply survival. It was how they had lived on their own dangerous world, and it was how they fought in the stars. The alien petitioners began to realize what they had unleashed. Their call for help, born out of desperation, had reached a species that did not do things in halves. They had not just called for help, they had called a storm. The humans were not coming like gentle guardians. They were coming like a tidal wave, ready to smash through anything in their path. For the aliens, it was both terrifying and comforting. They feared what such power could do, but they also knew that this power now moved in their defense. Every hour, the Armada grew larger. New ships joined from colonies far away. Reinforcements flowed in from distant stations. Dockyards produced fresh weapons at speeds no one else in the galaxy could match. Humanity's war machine was designed not just to fight, but to grow stronger while fighting. Even before the fleet left orbit, it was already larger than most entire empires' defenses. The alien leaders who had sent the SOS watched in silence. They tried to imagine the cost of such a force. How many resources had been spent? How many years of preparation had made this possible? But above all, they wondered what it meant that this entire storm of steel and fire had been unleashed because of their cry. Would their people survive the coming battle? Or would they be remembered only as the ones who woke the Deathworlders' fury? When the human armada finally began to move, the stars themselves seemed to tremble. Carriers, dreadnoughts, cruisers, and frigates all aligned, their engines flaring in unison. The fleet did not scatter or drift. It moved as one, like a single colossal organism, every part connected and coordinated. The discipline of the formation showed that this was not just raw power. It was trained, hardened, and guided by commanders who had prepared for wars far worse than this one. The aliens understood then that their plea for survival had transformed into something far greater. They were no longer just a small people crying out in fear. They were about to stand beside the most formidable war machine in known space. What had begun as a whisper for help had awakened a thunderous roar, and soon that roar would descend upon their enemies, unstoppable and absolute. The enemy who had attacked the small alien civilization had not worried when they first heard about the SOS message. To them it was nothing but the desperate cry of a weak species with no hope. They laughed at the thought of anyone answering it. After all, who would risk going to war for a powerless people? They believed their power was unshakable. Their fleets were large, their soldiers disciplined, and their control over conquered worlds seemed absolute. They thought themselves untouchable, but their arrogance blinded them to the truth. The message had been heard by Deathworlders, by humans, and that was something they had never prepared for. The first human fleets arrived quietly, without warning. The enemy believed they were facing a handful of ships, perhaps a small defense force. But as their sensors lit up, the scale became clear. Thousands of human warships emerged from the darkness, their formation tight and purposeful. Carriers released swarms of fighters like angry hornets. Dreadnoughts turned their cannons toward enemy strongholds, and smaller escort ships darted like wolves hunting prey. In that moment, the aggressors realized they were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. Humanity fought with precision that stunned the galaxy. Every move was planned, every strike executed with cold focus. Enemy fleets that had once dominated the stars were broken apart in hours. Ships were cut off from reinforcements, trapped in ambushes and destroyed with surgical strikes. Human commanders understood not only how to destroy ships, but how to destroy morale. They struck at supply lines, command centers, and communication hubs, leaving enemy forces blind and confused. The invaders tried to regroup, but before they could, humans were already there, cutting through their lines like a blade through glass. What made the humans truly terrifying was not only their weapons, but their psychology. They fought in a way that crushed not just the body, but the spirit. When an enemy fleet saw human carriers unleash endless waves of fighters, they did not see a battle. They saw inevitability. When their strongholds, once thought impenetrable, were silenced in minutes by human dreadnoughts, fear spread faster than any order. The chain of command, once strong, collapsed. Admirals who once gave confident commands now hesitated. Captains began to question survival. Soldiers who had marched proudly into conquest now whispered of Deathworlders and their unstoppable fury. Entire fleets surrendered before even firing their last rounds. Others broke apart in chaos, each ship fleeing in a different direction, abandoning allies in terror. Those who tried to fight bravely were erased in flashes of light, their sacrifice meaningless against the overwhelming force they faced. In some battles, the humans did not even need to destroy every ship. Their presence, their methodical dismantling of defenses was enough to make the enemy destroy themselves from within. Strongholds that had stood for generations were reduced to silence. Cities that had once been fortresses became little more than ruins as precision strikes took out key defenses. The invaders' empire, which had expanded confidently for decades, began to collapse in days. What had once looked unshakable now looked fragile and broken. The humans did not simply fight battles. They dismantled the very foundation of their enemy's power. Observers across the galaxy watched in awe and horror. Signals of the battle spread quickly, carried by traitors, spies, and diplomats. What they saw was not a rescue operation, but something much larger. Humanity was not merely defending the weak. They were tearing apart an empire piece by piece with such ruthless efficiency that it seemed less like war and more like extermination of a threat. To outsiders, it looked as though humans had not come to fight. They had come to demonstrate. For the small alien civilization who had sent the SOS, the scenes unfolding before their eyes were almost beyond belief. Where once they had watched their world burn under invader fleets, now they saw those same fleets turn to ash under human fire. Where once they had whispered prayers in fear, now they stood in silence, almost unable to process the scale of the vengeance being unleashed in their name. Their survival was being bought not with mercy but with overwhelming fury. The aggressors tried everything to stop the tide. They regrouped with what ships remained, tried to form new lines of defense, and called upon allies for aid. But none of it mattered. Every counterstrike was predicted, every defense smashed apart. Humanity did not slow down, did not hesitate, did not give their enemy a single breath of hope. They pressed forward with unrelenting speed, like a storm that refused to pass. In the end, the aggressors had no answer. Their empire, which once spread across countless systems, fractured into pieces. Their rulers fled into hiding, their admirals silenced, their armies scattered. What they had once thought to be an easy conquest had instead brought them to ruin. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate a single SOS call, and that mistake had cost them everything. To the galaxy, the lesson was clear. Humanity was not a species to ignore nor a power to provoke. Their tactics were more than weapons, they were a message. When humans fought, they fought to end wars, not prolong them. They brought not half measures, but total destruction. The battle was not a rescue. It was a dismantling, a demonstration, and a warning written in fire across the stars. When the last enemy fleet was gone and the skies were finally clear, the small alien civilization looked upon their world in silence. For the first time in years, there were no hostile ships above them, no threat of bombardment, no soldiers marching to enslave them. The humans had done what seemed impossible. They had ended the danger completely. Relief swept through their people like a tide. Families who had hidden in fear came out from the ruins. Leaders who had almost lost hope embraced one another. The cries of despair that had once filled their cities were replaced with cries of joy. They had survived. Against all odds, they had been saved. But with this relief came something else. Fear. The aliens had seen what the humans were capable of, and it was something both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The invaders had been destroyed with such power and precision that the line between rescue and annihilation seemed to vanish. For the weak, this was salvation. For anyone watching, it was also devastation. Whole fleets had been erased in hours. Fortresses had fallen without a chance to resist. An empire had been dismantled as if it were nothing more than a fragile toy. And it had all been done in the name of saving them. The rescued people could not decide whether to celebrate or tremble. On one hand, their children could now grow up free, their culture would survive, and their species would live to see another day. On the other hand, they knew now what it meant for Deathworlders to fight on their behalf. Humanity had not simply saved them, they had rewritten the balance of power around them forever. To be protected by such a force meant safety, but it also meant being forever tied to the shadow of those who had brought fire to the stars. News of the intervention spread quickly across the galaxy. No secret could be kept when fleets of such size moved, when entire empires crumbled in days. Traitors, diplomats, and spies carried the story from system to system. Every council chamber, every emperor's throne, every military command post echoed with the same question. What happens when humanity decides to act? Some civilizations praised the humans. They saw them as protectors, guardians of the weak who had stepped in when no one else dared. These voices argued that humanity had done what others had been too afraid to do. They had stopped a tyrant and saved a people. To them, the Deathworlders were proof that there was still justice in the galaxy, even if it came at the cost of war. For small and vulnerable species, the story became a beacon of hope. If they were ever threatened, perhaps the humans would come for them too. But not everyone celebrated. Other powers looked at the same events with dread. They saw not protectors but conquerors. If humans could dismantle an empire in days, what would stop them from doing the same to anyone who stood against them? They whispered warnings in dark halls. Humanity's help was inseparable from humanity's fury. To call upon them was to invite not just salvation, but total war. Was this the kind of protector anyone truly wanted? For many, the answer was uncertain. Interstellar politics shifted overnight. Alliances were questioned, treaties rewritten, and strategies reshaped. The balance of fear had changed. Before, the invader empire had been considered one of the great threats in the galaxy. Now it lay in ruins, and a new truth had taken its place. Humanity was not to be ignored. Their armada had left a scar on history, one that could not be erased. For the rescued aliens, life slowly began to rebuild. They repaired their cities, buried their dead, and started to dream again. But deep inside, they knew they would forever live with the memory of what had happened. When their children asked who had saved them, the answer would always carry two sides. Yes, it was the humans. Yes, they survived because of them. But survival had not come gently. It had come with the thunder of dreadnoughts, the fire of cannons, and the sight of an enemy empire collapsing before their eyes. They would always remember that their saviors were also destroyers. In the decades that followed, stories of the event became legends. Some told them with pride, speaking of humanity as heroes who could not ignore a cry for help. Others told them with warning, reminding all who listened that when humans fought, nothing was left unchanged. These stories spread across the stars, shaping how species thought about the Deathworlders, and this became the legacy of the Armada, a truth that every civilization understood, whether they admitted it openly or not. If you called upon humanity in your darkest hour, they would come. They would not hesitate. They would not come halfway, and they would not stop until the threat was destroyed completely. But their answer was never gentle. It was fury, absolute and unstoppable, a force that could save you but also remake everything you knew. For the galaxy, the meaning was clear. To summon humanity was to summon fire. To ask for their help was to unleash a storm. And once that storm had passed, nothing, no empire, no world, no future, would ever be the same again.